My beloved child, do not scroll away from this moment. Something has been waiting beneath the surface, quietly gathering the courage to reveal itself, and what you are about to hear may change the way you understand someone your heart has never been able to completely forget. Pause here for a moment, because the truth arriving now is not meant to frighten you. It is meant to free you from an image you may have carried for far too long. You believed you understood your soulmate. You believed you had already seen their strongest side, their weakest side, their silence, their distance, their affection, their confusion. But there is a part of them you have not truly seen yet, and heaven has been allowing circumstances to slowly pull back the curtain. You have asked yourself questions you rarely speak aloud. Why did this person sometimes seem so close to you, only to suddenly become impossible to understand? Why did their energy feel warm one moment and guarded the next? Why did certain conversations feel unfinished, as though something important was always being held behind their eyes? You may have assumed their silence meant indifference. You may have interpreted their hesitation as uncertainty about you. You may even have wondered whether the person you cared for was simply not capable of meeting you with the depth you were offering. But there is more to this story, and the first revelation is this: much of what you witnessed was not the absence of feeling. It was the presence of something they were trying desperately to control. There is a version of your soulmate that other people know, and there is a version that appears when nobody is watching. The world may know them as composed, practical, independent, perhaps even difficult to read. They learned how to keep certain emotions behind carefully chosen words. They learned how to smile when something inside them was unsettled. They learned how to change the subject when a conversation moved too close to the truth. And because they became so skilled at appearing unaffected, even you began to believe that perhaps nothing touched them as deeply as it touched you. But heaven has seen the moments you never saw. The quiet ones. The moments after the conversation ended. The moments when they stared at a message without responding. The moments when your name entered their thoughts unexpectedly and everything around them seemed to become distant. This is why their true side is beginning to emerge now. Something has shifted inside them. The walls that once protected them are no longer giving them peace. In fact, those same walls have begun to feel like a prison. They are realizing that hiding what they feel has not protected their heart, it has only made their heart heavier. They are beginning to understand that appearing strong while avoiding vulnerability is not the same as actually being strong. And this realization is creating a change you may soon notice in ways that seem small at first. A softer tone. A longer pause before they speak. A question they normally would never ask. A sudden curiosity about how you truly feel. These will not be random details. They will be evidence that the version of them you thought was permanent is beginning to crack open. But there is something deeper. Your soulmate has been carrying a truth about themselves that even they have struggled to admit. They are more emotionally affected by this connection than they ever intended to become. At first, they believed they could control it. They told themselves they could create distance whenever feelings became too intense. They thought time would make everything simpler. They believed distractions would help them return to the person they were before you became important. Yet every attempt to push the connection into the background only revealed how deeply it had already reached them. There were moments when they tried to convince themselves that what existed between you was ordinary. They compared it to other connections. They looked for logical explanations. They may have told themselves they were simply curious about you, simply comfortable around you, simply remembering an unfinished chapter. But something always disrupted that explanation. Perhaps it was the way they remembered details about you without trying. Perhaps it was the way certain songs, places, conversations, or quiet hours brought your presence back into their mind. Perhaps it was the strange realization that even while surrounded by other people, a part of their attention remained somewhere else. With you. And that frightened them more than they admitted. Not because you were dangerous to them, my child, but because genuine emotional connection requires a person to be seen. And being truly seen can be terrifying to someone who has survived by remaining partially hidden. Your soulmate learned long ago that revealing too much could lead to disappointment. They may have experienced moments in their past where honesty was misunderstood, vulnerability was dismissed, or trust was not handled carefully. So when your presence began awakening something real, their first instinct was not always to move closer. Sometimes it was to retreat. This is where you misunderstood them, and understandably so. You saw the retreat but could not see the fear behind it. You felt the distance but could not hear the conversation they were having inside themselves. You experienced the silence without knowing how much noise existed underneath it. And because you could not see what was happening in their hidden world, you created explanations from what was visible. Perhaps you thought they had changed their mind. Perhaps you believed they had forgotten you. Perhaps you wondered whether the bond had only existed strongly in your heart. But what if the truth was almost the opposite? What if they stepped back because the connection became more meaningful than they were prepared to handle? What if certain moments between you made them confront emotions they had spent years avoiding? What if the person who seemed emotionally distant was actually overwhelmed by the possibility that someone could matter enough to change the direction of their life? This does not excuse every confusing action. Heaven is not asking you to ignore your own boundaries or pretend that silence never hurt. Your heart deserves clarity. Your peace deserves respect. But there is a difference between understanding someone and abandoning yourself for them. You are being shown the truth so you can see more clearly, not so you can accept less than you deserve. And this is where the revelation becomes even more surprising. Your soulmate has recently begun seeing you differently. Something changed in the way they perceive your silence, your strength, or the way you stop trying to force an outcome. They once expected you to remain exactly where they left you emotionally. Perhaps they believed you would always be available, always wondering, always waiting for them to decide what they wanted. They did not necessarily think this with cruelty. Sometimes people become accustomed to receiving love without understanding what it costs the person giving it. But recently, your energy changed. You began turning inward. You began protecting parts of yourself that once reached toward them without hesitation. And whether they know how to explain it or not, they noticed. Your absence from places where your energy once appeared loudly began speaking for you. The message they received was not revenge. It was not punishment. It was something far more powerful. You were learning that your worth did not depend on their readiness. And that realization shook them. Because suddenly, they were forced to ask themselves a question they had postponed. What happens if you truly move forward? Not as a threat. Not as a dramatic ending. Simply as life continuing. What happens if someone else recognizes the qualities they took too long to understand? What happens if the conversations they kept postponing eventually become conversations they no longer have the opportunity to begin? What happens if the person they assumed would always understand finally decides that understanding cannot replace mutual effort? These questions have awakened something inside them. They have started reviewing moments that once seemed ordinary. A look you gave them. A sentence you said casually. The way you offered kindness when they did not know how to receive it. The way you recognized something in them that they themselves had not yet recognized. Memory has a strange way of becoming louder when certainty disappears. And now, certain memories of you are no longer sitting quietly in their past. They are returning with meaning. They are beginning to recognize that you were not asking for perfection. You were asking for honesty. You were not asking them to know the entire future. You were asking them to stop pretending the connection meant nothing. You were not demanding they become someone else. You were waiting for them to become truthful about who they already were. That is the true side now being revealed. Because beneath the guarded personality, beneath the hesitation, beneath the carefully controlled responses, your soulmate is far more sentimental than you knew. They remember things they never told you they remembered. They notice details they pretend not to notice. They have imagined conversations with you they never had the courage to begin. They have wondered how differently things might have unfolded if they had spoken earlier. And somewhere inside them is a tenderness they protected so fiercely that it became almost invisible. But lately, that tenderness has been refusing to remain hidden. There was a recent moment, perhaps small from the outside, when something reminded them of you and they could no longer dismiss what surfaced. Maybe someone said something that echoed words you once spoke. Maybe they saw someone choosing courage in love and suddenly recognized their own hesitation. Maybe they watched two people communicate honestly and felt the uncomfortable awareness of everything left unsaid between you. Whatever the exact trigger was, it opened a door inside them. And behind that door was regret. Not the destructive kind that says everything is ruined. A more awakening kind. The kind that asks, why did I make this harder than it needed to be? For the first time, they began looking at their behavior from your perspective. That changed everything. They remembered times you were probably confused by their inconsistency. They saw how their silence could have looked like rejection. They recognized that their need to protect themselves may have unintentionally made you feel unimportant. And the realization did not sit comfortably with them. Because they know something now that they did not fully understand before. You were not trying to control them. You were trying to understand them. And there is a difference. You gave them more emotional space than they realized. You allowed them room to process things you could not see. You may even have defended them privately in your own heart when another part of you wanted to walk away completely. Yet eventually, your soul grew tired of translating silence into hope. That moment mattered. Because when you stopped carrying the entire emotional weight of the connection, something shifted toward them. Suddenly, the questions you had been holding became theirs to answer. Why did I hold back? Why was I afraid to say what I felt? Why did I assume there would always be more time? What was I truly protecting myself from? And the answer they are beginning to discover is not what they expected. They were not protecting themselves from you. They were protecting themselves from becoming the person love was asking them to become. That realization is powerful, my child. Because love does not merely bring comfort. Sometimes it exposes the places within us that are still hiding. It reveals our fear of being known. It confronts our habit of running when something matters too much. It shows us where pride has replaced communication and where self-protection has become self-sabotage. Your soulmate is standing near such a realization now. They are beginning to see that meeting you was never only about finding someone they felt drawn toward. It was about being confronted with parts of themselves they had ignored. Your presence became a mirror, and mirrors can be uncomfortable when they reveal both beauty and unfinished healing. But something important is happening. They are no longer looking away as quickly. They are becoming curious about the very emotions they once tried to bury. They are asking why your opinion matters so much to them. Why your distance feels different from anyone else's. Why the possibility of permanently losing emotional access to you creates a reaction they cannot dismiss. And each question is leading them toward the same truth. You mattered more than they admitted. Yet there is another layer, and this one reaches deeper. Your soulmate has a side that wants to protect what they love, but they often express protection in confusing ways. Instead of saying, "I care about you," they may become quiet while trying to solve problems internally. Instead of admitting, "I am afraid to lose you," they may act detached because admitting fear feels like surrendering control. Instead of saying, "I need reassurance," they may disappear into their thoughts and wait for the feeling to pass. This pattern once made them feel safe. Now it is making them lonely. They are beginning to understand that emotional safety cannot be built through emotional absence. And someone, somewhere, recently made them confront this. A conversation may have occurred. A friend, family member, or even an unexpected stranger may have said something that stayed with them. It might not have been about you directly. That is what makes this so extraordinary. Sometimes truth enters through a side door. Someone may have spoken about missed opportunities, about love, about pride, about the danger of assuming people will wait forever. Your soulmate heard those words, and while everyone else moved on from the conversation, they carried them away. Because the words had your face attached to them. That night, or in a quiet moment afterward, they thought about you. Not casually. Deeply. They imagined what they would say if there were no fear, no pride, no history standing between you. And for once, their imaginary conversation did not begin with explanations. It began with honesty. They imagined admitting that they had been more affected than they showed. They imagined telling you there were times they wanted to reach out but stopped themselves. They imagined confessing that certain choices came from fear, not certainty. They imagined asking whether you ever understood what they could not say. But then something unexpected happened within that imagined conversation. They realized that saying these things someday may not be enough. Because someday has become their hiding place. Someday I will explain. Someday I will be ready. Someday I will say what happened. Someday I will tell them how I really felt. Someday I will fix what silence complicated. But time has been teaching them a lesson. Someday is not a promise. And this is where urgency enters the story. Not panic. Not fear. Awareness. They are becoming aware that opportunities are living things. They change. People grow. Hearts heal. Circumstances move. The door that exists today may not look exactly the same tomorrow. Your soulmate can feel this. That is why their true side is pushing forward now. There is a conversation forming inside them. Words are organizing themselves. Truths once buried are becoming difficult to suppress. And one particular truth is creating the greatest pressure of all. It concerns the reason they originally held back. You may think you know the reason. You may believe it was another person, poor timing, uncertainty, family expectations, emotional immaturity, or simple fear of commitment. Some of these things may have played a role. But beneath them lies something more personal. Something they never explained. Something connected to how they saw themselves when they met you. Your soulmate believed you saw a version of them they were not sure they could become. You saw possibility. They saw pressure. You saw goodness beneath their defenses. They saw the risk of disappointing someone who believed in them. You saw a person capable of deeper love. They saw every reason they might fail at giving it. And instead of telling you this, they tried to become smaller in your presence so your expectations would become smaller too. This is why they sometimes behaved in ways that seemed opposite to what you sensed from them. The deeper the connection became, the more afraid they became that eventually you would discover their insecurities and change your mind. So they unconsciously tried to control when that disappointment would happen. They created distance before you could. They withheld words before you could reject them. They acted unaffected before you could see how deeply affected they were. But something is changing. They are beginning to realize that you may have already seen those imperfect parts and cared anyway. And this realization is breaking something open inside them. Because perhaps the person they were most afraid of disappointing was never you. It was themselves. They are tired of watching fear make decisions their heart does not agree with. They are tired of pretending silence feels powerful when it actually leaves them wondering. They are tired of returning mentally to conversations they should have simply had. And heaven is using this season not to force them toward you, but to force them toward truth. There is an important difference. Love without truth becomes imagination. Connection without communication becomes confusion. And your journey was never meant to remain permanently suspended between what was felt and what was said. Something must become clearer. Either through words, actions, boundaries, or a new understanding, truth is moving toward the surface. But my child, this message is also about you. Because while their true side is being revealed, so is yours. You have become stronger in ways you may not recognize. There was once a version of you who believed receiving clarity from them would finally give you peace. Now you are discovering that peace can begin before another person explains themselves. You are learning that loving someone does not require losing yourself inside their uncertainty. You are learning that you can hold compassion for their journey while still honoring your own. That growth has changed the entire energy between you. You are no longer standing at the same emotional doorway asking the same question. And your soulmate senses that. This is why what happens next may feel different from anything that happened before. If they come forward, they cannot come forward in the same way. Half-truths will feel heavier now. Mixed signals will feel more obvious. Avoidance will no longer create the same response from you. Something has matured inside your spirit. You are ready for depth, not guessing. And strangely, your readiness for truth is helping awaken theirs. But there is still one final wall inside them. One thing they are afraid you will misunderstand if they reveal it. This is not necessarily a dark secret. It is something emotional, something vulnerable, something that changes the meaning of several moments from your past. They have kept it hidden because revealing it would force them to admit how early their feelings became real. Earlier than you think. There was a specific moment when their perception of you changed completely. A moment you may barely remember. Perhaps you said something. Perhaps you showed kindness when they expected judgment. Perhaps they watched the way you handled a difficult situation. Perhaps you stood your ground without cruelty. Whatever happened, they saw something in you that stayed with them. From that moment onward, you were no longer ordinary to them. But they never told you. Instead, they became more careful, more guarded. Because now there was something to lose. And the strangest part is that you may have interpreted that increased caution as decreasing interest. The opposite may have been happening. They were becoming emotionally invested while trying desperately not to look emotionally invested. And this hidden contradiction shaped everything that followed. There were times they almost told you. Times the words came close. Times they opened a message, wrote something, erased it, and chose a safer sentence instead. Times they wanted to ask you whether you felt the same but convinced themselves they would rather not know. Times they watched you walk away from a conversation and wished they had stopped you. Those moments have not vanished. They have accumulated. And now they are becoming impossible for them to ignore. This is why you may soon witness a side of your soulmate that feels unfamiliar. More open. More reflective. Perhaps surprisingly emotional. Maybe even unusually direct. Do not assume this change happened overnight. It has been building silently through every moment they avoided the truth and later wished they had chosen differently. But there is one particular realization that has brought everything to the edge. Your soulmate recently discovered something about you. Not a scandal. Not a betrayal. Something much more unsettling to someone who believed there would always be time. They discovered that you may finally be learning how to live without needing an answer from them. And that realization touched the deepest part of their fear. Because they always believed the connection would remain waiting in the same place. Now they understand that love can remain meaningful while still moving forward. And suddenly, the question inside them is no longer, "Do I have feelings?" They know the answer to that. The question has become, am I willing to finally act like those feelings matter? That is the threshold they are standing at. And what they decide there will reveal their true side more clearly than any words ever could. Watch actions, my child. Listen to consistency. Notice whether courage begins replacing avoidance. Because true revelation is not merely someone confessing that they care. It is someone becoming willing to show that care with honesty. Something inside your soulmate knows this now. And tonight, in the quiet part of their thoughts, another memory may rise again. The memory of the exact moment they realized you had become different from everyone else. The moment they never told you about. The moment that explains why they pulled away when part of them wanted to come closer. And hidden inside that memory is a sentence they have never said aloud. A sentence they have carried far longer than you would ever guess. They have rehearsed it privately. They have nearly spoken it. They have wondered how your eyes would change if you heard it. But there is a reason those words stayed trapped behind their silence. Because once they tell you what truly happened in that moment, you will finally understand that the person you thought was emotionally distant was hiding something completely different. And what they were hiding was not the absence of love. It was the terrifying realization that meeting you had already changed the future they thought they wanted. But there is still one detail you do not know. One choice they made immediately after realizing this. A choice that created the distance between you. A choice they now deeply question. And the truth behind that choice is the part they are finally preparing to reveal. There comes a moment when a person can no longer hide from the truth they have been carrying inside themselves, and your soulmate is approaching that moment now. The choice they made after realizing how deeply you affected them was not what their heart wanted. It was what their fear believed was necessary. They stepped backward when something inside them wanted to move closer. They became quieter when there were 1,000 things they wanted to say. They convinced themselves that creating distance would restore the emotional control they felt they were losing. But what they did not understand then was that distance cannot erase something meaningful. Sometimes distance only makes the truth easier to hear. For a while, they believed their decision had worked. They returned to familiar routines. They occupied their mind with ordinary responsibilities. They tried to behave as though nothing extraordinary had happened between you. From the outside, everything may have looked normal. Yet beneath that appearance, something remained unfinished. Your presence had already awakened a part of them that could not simply return to sleep. They could distract themselves from it, deny it, rationalize it, even pretend it belonged to the past, but they could not completely silence it. And this is where their true side began revealing itself privately. You never saw the number of times they almost reached toward you. You never heard the internal conversations where they argued with themselves about whether to speak. You did not witness the moments when they remembered something you said and suddenly understood it differently. There were times when they wanted to know whether you were thinking about them, yet pride prevented them from asking. There were moments when they wondered whether you had finally stopped caring, and instead of admitting that possibility frightened them, they acted as though it did not matter. But it mattered. Far more than they allowed anyone to see. The person you thought could easily detach was not always detached at all. They were trying to manage emotions they did not fully understand. They were afraid that once they acknowledged how important you had become, they would have to make decisions. They would have to become vulnerable. They would have to explain contradictions in their behavior. Most importantly, they would have to risk hearing an answer from you they could not control. So they chose uncertainty because uncertainty allowed hope to remain untouched. As long as they did not ask, they could imagine you still cared. As long as they did not confess, they could pretend there was still unlimited time. As long as they kept everything hidden, they never had to face the possibility of rejection. But hiding created another possibility they had not considered. You could heal without them. You could stop waiting for explanations. You could become peaceful enough that their silence no longer controlled your emotions. And when they began sensing that transformation in you, something inside them became unsettled. Not because your healing was wrong. Your growth was necessary. But your strength confronted them with a reality they had avoided. While they were deciding whether to be courageous, your life was still moving. That realization changed the way they remembered you. Suddenly, they were no longer remembering only the dramatic moments. They began remembering the quiet ones. The little gestures. The patience in your voice. The times you noticed when something was wrong without forcing them to explain. The moments when you gave them emotional room instead of demanding immediate answers. They remembered how naturally certain conversations flowed. They remembered the feeling of being understood without having to perform. And then they noticed something painful. They had mistaken emotional safety for permanence. Because you made them feel safe, they assumed there would always be another opportunity. Another conversation. Another message. Another moment. Another chance to say what they should have said earlier. But my child, life does not promise endless repetitions of the same opportunity. And something recently reminded them of this. It may have been watching another person lose an opportunity because they waited too long. It may have been hearing someone speak about regret. It may have been a simple conversation about relationships, timing, or missed chances. Whatever triggered it, your soulmate suddenly saw themselves in someone else's story. And they did not like what they saw. They realized they had been waiting for certainty before offering honesty. But love rarely provides certainty first. Sometimes honesty must come before certainty. Sometimes courage means saying, "This matters to me," without knowing exactly what happens next. Your soulmate had spent so much time preparing themselves for every possible outcome that they nearly forgot the simplest truth: you were never asking them to predict the future. You needed them to be present. This realization followed them into silence. They began replaying one particular memory involving you. The memory connected to that hidden moment when their feelings changed. Perhaps you do not remember the exact day. Perhaps to you it was nothing extraordinary. But to them, something happened internally. They saw you when you were not trying to impress anyone. That was what affected them. There was something genuine about you in that moment. Something unguarded. Maybe it was compassion. Maybe strength. Maybe the way you spoke honestly without becoming cruel. Maybe the way you cared without demanding recognition. Whatever they witnessed, it contradicted an assumption they had carried about relationships. They had believed closeness always came with conditions. They had believed being understood required pretending to be stronger than they felt. They had believed showing weakness eventually gave another person power to hurt them. Then they encountered something in you that challenged those beliefs. And instead of immediately feeling relieved, they became afraid. Because when someone has lived behind emotional armor for a long time, safety can initially feel unfamiliar. Your soulmate did not know whether to trust what they were feeling. So after that moment, they made a decision. They decided to watch you. Not in a sinister way. They began observing more carefully. They listened more closely to how you treated other people. They noticed whether your kindness remained consistent when there was nothing for you to gain. They paid attention to how you reacted when disappointed. They quietly compared your words with your actions. They were searching for the flaw that would allow them to dismiss what they felt. They wanted evidence that their walls were justified. Because if they could convince themselves you were not different, they would not have to risk opening their heart. But something happened that they did not expect. The more they observed, the harder it became to dismiss you. You were imperfect, yes. You had your own fears, mistakes, emotional moments, and contradictions. But your imperfections did not erase what they saw. In fact, your humanity may have made the connection feel more real. They realized they were not drawn to an imaginary perfect person. They were drawn to you. And that frightened them even more. An ideal can be forgotten. A real person leaves memories. A real person changes you. A real person forces you to decide whether you are willing to become real too. So they created distance. That was the choice. They believed distance would reduce the emotional intensity. Instead, it created space for reflection. And reflection became dangerous to every excuse they had built. Without your presence constantly in front of them, they began noticing what was missing. They missed your way of communicating. They missed the particular energy you brought into ordinary moments. They missed being understood in ways they had once taken for granted. Most unexpectedly, they missed who they became around you. That realization was enormous. Because sometimes we believe we miss another person when what we truly miss is the part of ourselves that appeared in their presence. Around you, your soulmate glimpsed a version of themselves that was softer, braver, more emotionally honest. They may not have fully become that person, but they saw the possibility. And when they stepped away, that version of themselves seemed to disappear again. This is why the story has never been only about whether they have feelings for you. The deeper question is whether they are willing to become emotionally mature enough to honor those feelings. Heaven does not measure love only by intensity. Love must eventually become action, responsibility, truth, respect, and consistency. Your soulmate is learning this now. They are beginning to understand that powerful feelings do not automatically create a healthy connection. Two people can care deeply and still misunderstand each other. Two people can feel drawn together and still allow fear to create distance. Two hearts can recognize something extraordinary while two frightened minds keep finding reasons to postpone it. This is why your growth matters so much. You are no longer being asked to chase hidden feelings. If something is real, it must eventually become visible through choices. And your soulmate knows they are reaching that point. Their true side cannot remain something you are expected to imagine. They must show it. That is the challenge now standing before them. And recently, they began preparing themselves for what honesty might actually require. At first, they imagined a perfect conversation where they could explain everything and you would immediately understand. But then they realized something humbling: they cannot control your reaction. You may have questions. You may need time. You may not respond exactly as they imagined. You may tell them that certain things hurt you. You may require evidence that their behavior has genuinely changed. And the old version of them would have used these possibilities as reasons to stay silent. But another side is emerging. A side willing to listen. A side willing to admit, "I handled this badly." A side willing to say, "I was afraid." A side willing to stop hiding behind complicated explanations. That side has always existed. You simply rarely saw it. And there is something else you need to understand. Your soulmate has privately defended you more than you know. There were moments when someone misunderstood you, questioned something about you, or formed an opinion without seeing the whole picture. Your soulmate may not have made a dramatic declaration, but inside themselves they felt unexpectedly protective. That reaction surprised them. Why did your reputation matter to them? Why did they feel uncomfortable hearing someone reduce you to a simple judgment? Why did they instinctively remember the qualities in you that others could not see? Because somewhere along the way, they had learned your heart more closely than they admitted. And there may have been one particular conversation that exposed this. Someone mentioned you. Perhaps casually. Perhaps your soulmate had not expected your name to appear. Yet the moment it did, their emotional reaction arrived before their logical mind could control it. Their tone changed. Their attention sharpened. Something in them became alert. And another person noticed. That is important. Because your soulmate had become skilled at hiding their feelings from you, but they were not prepared for someone else to recognize them. A question may have followed. Why do you care so much? Maybe it was not phrased exactly that way, but the meaning was similar. And for a moment, your soulmate had no answer. Not because they did not know. Because they knew too well. They changed the subject. They laughed it away. They gave some neutral explanation. But later, alone, the question returned. Why do I care so much? And this time they could not avoid the answer. Because you became important. Simple words. Terrifying truth. You became important. Not because heaven forced two people into a predetermined story. Not because your soulmate had no choice. Love without choice is not love. You became important through countless human moments that accumulated until something inside them could no longer call the connection ordinary. And now they are realizing how much effort they spent pretending otherwise. This is where regret has transformed into motivation. They do not merely regret what happened. They are beginning to question what they can do differently. That distinction matters. Regret looks backward. Growth eventually moves forward. Your soulmate is slowly turning toward the future. But there is something they fear. They fear that when they finally show you their true side, you may think it arrived too late. They fear you will look at their vulnerability and remember all the moments they offered silence instead. They fear you will wonder why they could not have been this honest earlier. And somewhere inside, they know you would have every right to ask. So they are faced with a difficult choice. Protect their pride and keep wondering. Or risk their pride and finally discover the truth. This choice has been following them everywhere. During quiet mornings, late evenings, unexpected moments when your memory surfaces. There is no dramatic thunder announcing it. Just a growing internal awareness that something cannot remain unfinished forever. And my child, while this unfolds, remember what your role is not. You are not required to rescue them from their fear. You are not required to prove your worth again. You are not required to decode every silence. You have already carried enough questions. Let their actions speak. Let truth approach you in a form that does not require endless interpretation. Your task is to remain anchored in the person you have become. Because something beautiful has happened through all this uncertainty. You learn that being chosen by another person is not the beginning of your value. You were valuable before they understood you. You were worthy when they were confused. You remained worthy during every silence. Their awakening does not create your worth. It only changes what they are finally capable of seeing. And they are seeing more now. They are seeing how much strength existed behind your tenderness. They once thought your emotional openness meant you would always remain available regardless of how they behaved. Now they understand your softness had boundaries. Your kindness was never weakness. Your patience was never permission for endless uncertainty. And when you began protecting your peace, they saw another side of you too. A side they respected. Maybe even admired. This created an unexpected shift in attraction. Because they were no longer simply remembering the person who cared for them. They were seeing someone capable of walking forward with dignity. And suddenly, the possibility of losing you stopped being theoretical. It became real. Yet the most powerful change is not fear of losing you. It is their growing desire to stop losing themselves. Your connection has exposed something they can no longer ignore. They have repeated this pattern before. Perhaps not exactly with another soulmate or romantic connection, but emotionally. When something mattered deeply, they withdrew. When vulnerability appeared, they became guarded. When they needed to communicate, they overthought. When someone approached the hidden parts of their heart, they found reasons to create distance. They thought this pattern protected them. Now they can see what it cost. Opportunities, closeness, understanding, peace. And perhaps, nearly, you. That word, nearly, has become important. Because they do not yet believe everything is over. Something inside them senses there may still be room for truth. Not a guarantee of any particular ending. But room for honesty. Room for a conversation. Room for accountability. Room to finally reveal who they were beneath the behavior that confused you. And this is where something extraordinary happened. Your soulmate recently began forming the words they would use if given the chance to speak without hiding. At first, the words were complicated. They wanted to explain everything. Every reason. Every fear. Every misunderstanding. Every circumstance. But slowly, all those explanations fell away. And what remained was much simpler. I cared more than I showed. That is near the center of what they have been hiding. But it is not the deepest confession. There is another sentence beneath it. A sentence they are even more afraid to admit. Because it concerns something they did during the period of distance. Something you never knew about. Again, do not let your mind run toward darkness. This is not being revealed to frighten you. It is an emotional truth. During the distance, your soulmate tried to prove to themselves that they could move on from what they felt. They attempted to convince themselves that life without this connection would feel easier. They immersed themselves in routines, conversations, plans, perhaps even new possibilities. And for a little while, they believed they were succeeding. Then something happened. They experienced a moment they thought should have made them happy. Perhaps good news arrived. Perhaps they accomplished something. Perhaps they were surrounded by people. Perhaps they were enjoying an ordinary day. And instinctively, before they could stop themselves, one thought appeared. I wish I could tell you. That moment broke through everything. Because it revealed something they could no longer explain away. You were not only someone they associated with longing or romance. You had become someone their heart wanted to share life with. Small victories. Strange thoughts. Ordinary stories. Difficult days. Unexpected laughter. That frightened them because it was deeper than attraction. It was emotional belonging. And once they recognized it, the distance they had created began feeling different. Before, distance had felt like protection. Now it felt like separation from someone they genuinely wanted in their world. That is when the regret became sharper. They began wondering what you were doing. Whether you were happy. Whether you had someone to share your victories with. Whether another person had begun occupying the emotional space they left empty. And then came the question they had avoided above all others. What if I taught them how to live without me? The thought stayed. Not because you belong to them. You belong to yourself. But because they realized their silence may have encouraged exactly the independence they now fear could carry you beyond them. And still, heaven is not asking you to shrink your growth to make someone else comfortable. Continue becoming. Continue healing. Continue living. If your soulmate is meant to meet you honestly, they must meet the version of you that grew, not demand the version that waited. They are beginning to understand this. That is why their next step cannot simply be sentimental. They know a beautiful message alone cannot repair everything. They know emotion without consistency would only recreate the old cycle. So something more serious is developing inside them. They are asking themselves what they would actually change. How would they communicate differently? How would they respond when fear returns? Could they remain present during uncomfortable conversations instead of disappearing? Could they tell the truth before circumstances forced it out? Could they offer you clarity instead of expecting you to interpret them? These questions are evidence of something deeper than longing. They are evidence of transformation beginning. But transformation is only real when choices follow. And one choice is approaching. There is a reason their true side is being revealed now instead of months earlier. A recent discovery has changed their sense of time. They learned something that made them realize the situation between you may not remain suspended much longer. It was not necessarily something you directly told them. They may have noticed it indirectly. A change. A piece of information. Something someone said. Something about the direction your life is taking. And when they understood what it could mean, they became completely still. Because suddenly the future they had assumed would remain available no longer looked guaranteed. For the first time, they imagined you not merely distant from them emotionally. They imagined you genuinely entering a new chapter. And that image produced a reaction so immediate that even they could no longer deny what they felt. They knew they had to make a decision. Soon. Not because some mystical clock is forcing them. Because reality is. They can continue being the person who feels deeply and says little. Or they can become the person who finally allows their actions to match their heart. And my child, the decision they are considering involves something you never expected from them. Something that would require them to lower their guard completely. Something they once promised themselves they would never do. They are considering telling you not only how they feel now, but why they disappeared emotionally when everything between you began becoming real. They want to explain the exact fear that controlled them. They want to tell you about the moment they realized you had reached a place in their heart no one had reached in a very long time. But before they can do that, there is one person they feel they must speak to first. Someone who knows a part of their story you never knew. Someone who witnessed the change in them long before you realized anything was happening. And your soulmate has already considered asking this person one question. A question about you. A question whose answer could determine whether they finally step forward or remain silent. But what your soulmate does not yet know is that this person has been waiting for that question. Because they noticed the truth long ago. They noticed the way your soulmate changed whenever your name appeared. They noticed what happened after the distance began. They noticed the regret your soulmate thought they had hidden perfectly. And when that conversation finally happens, this person is preparing to tell your soulmate something they never expected to hear. Something about you. Something about the connection. And something about the real reason your soulmate has never been able to completely let you go.